It is Bones, and today I would like to do a little video on the topic of your DC Multiverse collection and the way you can modify it or adapt different things to take it up to the next level if that is something that you're interested in doing. Now, I have been thinking of doing this vid for a while. It's probably not going to be that long of a video, but there's just some, tips and other things I would like to talk about getting the most out of your DC Multiverse collection. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm a big time McFarlane DC Multiverse collector, but I've actually been collecting DC figures for a while now. And over the years, I've, dabbled in customizing. I'm a really big collector of the, retail DC lines. And then recently, since the McFarlane line is so customizer friendly, I've just gotten really into doing a lot of different work now. Over the last couple years, since McFarlane got the license, I have done tons of custom figures. Most of them are, sitting behind me. Even this Joker here in front of me is actually custom repainted. It is the Rebirth Joker, but I kind of, added my own little paint to him to make him more of a regular comic version. Actually, this is like one of the older custom, little paint jobs that I did. But since then, I have done tons of repaints, and by far, repainting is the easiest thing that you can do. It doesn't take too much skill. I mean, the practice, the more you do it and the more you practice it, you will get more efficient at it. And also, it's a pretty cool little stress reliever, and to something to do to take your mind off of things and stuff like that, which is predominantly what I use it for. Now, of course, to do this, you need not more than to buy some brushes. I do buy, every once in a while, I'll buy just a pack of brushes wherever I'm at. It doesn't really matter which kind they are. All of that depends is that you learn how to use different ones, and your skills in actually like adding the paint to the brush and how it applies to when you do the figure. Now, of course, McFarlane is kind of notorious for not adding all of the paint details, but of course we know that he does this because right now he is focused on having a mass retail line, which means that he wants to get the figures out basically the cheapest that it could be to keep the price point down. So the first thing that's going to take a hit, of course, is the paint. So you'll basically have an awesome figure that's just missing, little details, and it could be from painting, having to paint belt loops to maybe the eyes are a little bit crooked and stuff like that. And that's a good way to start, is like on the small detail, which is what I did. But eventually you'll get into more techniques, which will be like taking the whole figure apart, heating them up, and then applying the paint. Maybe do like a wipe down with some alcohol, and then you also get into washes and stuff like that. Not the biggest fan of washes, just because they're kind of hard to do. But I mean, recently I took a look at that old school John Wesley Shipp Flash figure, and that's like a perfect example of how a plastic figure can actually look really good with just some wash, on the muscle tone and stuff like that, which is basically what you want to go for. You don't want to overdo it and just get like a whole, a cluster of wash that just looks pretty bad. But it happens, you live and learn, and it's actually pretty fun. I've actually gotten pretty proficient at some things, some paint work, and other things I still need to learn. So, but that's how a lot of things are. Now, you do buy your brushes, it doesn't really matter which ones they are, as long as you like them and they hold the paint good. I like to use actually Mondo paints. Now, these are actually from Target, but you can use any paints. Now, you do end up using different paints because the way they apply to the plastic and the different types of plastic that McFarlane uses actually kind of dictates what paint you'll use. But you could use oils, you could use model paints, you can even use the cheap ones like from Walmart, which are like like $1.50. These are a little bit more. These cost I think around $4 and maybe three. But I've just found that these apply really good to the plastic and they dry really nicely. Now, of course, after that, you get into like sealing your work. It just depends what you're doing. If you want a matte look, which is like no gloss at all, or if you want a shiny look, it all depend of what kind of sealer you use. Now, sometimes you don't even have to seal it if you're not going to be handling it. It is kind of advised to seal your work after, just to minimize the paint flaking or any rubbing and stuff like that. Now, I said before, I've done tons of custom paint jobs, but last night I just happened to get on one and I just didn't stop until I was done. Now, I had already painted the head and I just went ahead and did the whole figure. Now, this is the General Zod from McFarlane, and of course I do have the original unpainted version. Now, there is nothing wrong with collecting this line and just leaving it the way it is. I mean, that I do that. Most of my custom figures are actually behind me or like on their own display. But if you want to collect the line and just leave it the way it's issued, that's fine. But it is sometimes fun to add your own details and things that like you don't like that you could just fix yourself, or even there's sometimes like little cutesy things that you could actually fix with just a little bit of paint, which will save you anguish and stuff like that. But basically I took this original release of Zod, which kind of looks kind of bland, and the plastic is just really flat and it just looks like plastic. There's no type of washes or anything like that on him. Of course, also the pins were the wrong color for the boots. No details on the boots. Now, I did get a little bit of inspiration from like a statue of Zod that I found online, which shows a little bit more gold detail. And I did take these ideas and put them onto this custom paint. Now, what I thought I would like to do is to actually give them the red, heat vision eyes, just to give them some kind of emotion since they made them like so bland. I also wanted to touch up the hair, give them some highlights and some gray, but also some matte, flat paint look, just because this one looks so shiny. But in all actuality, at the end, I did think it came out pretty well. If you put them next to each other, you can actually see all the differences. The wash that I put on the armor, the gold highlights that I did on the boots, and also even his whole costume, I gave like a gunmetal kind of wash so that it didn't look just so plasticky, as you could say. And especially like on the gauntlets, I added a dark wash. That you do that by adding some dark paint and then just wiping it off and leaving where it goes into the cracks and crevices, which is kind of hard to do. I mean, once you get the hang of it, they do come out really nice, but you gotta basically know what you're doing. That is kind of like a more advanced technique, but I really like the way he came out. Now, you can still manipulate him and pose him, get him in some cool poses, some flight poses. But to me, he actually looks a lot better like this. And I actually did a lot of work on the actual face portrait, which is I like shaded in with like a different tone of flesh to give like the shadows and the wrinkles on the forehead and stuff like that, just to give him a little bit more life than he actually had coming straight from McFarlane. So in the end, I was really happy with that. I did do this all last night. I just could not sleep, and it actually gave me something to do. And then I was kind of like, when I got to a certain point, I said that was all I could do for tonight. So I went ahead and left him the way he was. Another thing that is awesome is the way his eyes came out. I added a little bit of yellow like around where the iris would be, just to not just be red, but actually have a little bit like different highlights in the actual eyes. So that was a fun little quick project that I did, but that just shows you the difference of how you could take something that is released and then just make it all that much better for your collection. So really happy with that. Now, of course, the next thing you could do is actually in articulation, and that would be, this is actually the original reverse flash without any alterations or anything like that. Just your regular release figure from McFarlane, which I really love. It's an awesome character, awesome figure. But I did make a custom reverse flash that I actually repainted the head that came in the 2-pack of the Wally West flash, which has more like a grimacing or like, anguished face. But what I did want to show today was how you can actually mod these guys to get a little bit more range of motion and dexterity. Now you do need a couple of tools. Of course, I always have my Dremel here. Now this, I bought this at Home Depot, but you could get them wherever you could find them. But they do have different attachments. You can actually connect like a little saw blade if you need to cut, drill bits, stuff like that. But it does really come in useful. This is a highly, recommended tool that you might need, but it is kind of advanced. You don't want to be a little kid and using this, but I do highly recommend, if you like doing customs and mods and stuff like that, you get yourself a Dremel. But it does come with this bit, which is the usual bit that I use to mod for these figures. And one thing you do want to do is heat these up. Now, I would think that whenever you get a McFarlane figure and you first take them out of the package, I would, either give them a hot water bath and then let them dry, or hit them with the heat gun, which I also have my heat gun here. Now, this is a regular standard heat gun. It has 2 levels of heat, which is like really high and just medium heat. Now, this is another thing that you actually want to be real careful with. This could actually melt your figure, so you got to really know what you're doing and keep it away and just use it to warm up. Like, say you want to pop off the heads, or something's kind of tight, or you just want to give the whole figure a little heat bath, without having to get some hot water. You can actually use the heat gun. But my recommended way to do this actually is with hot water. It just heats it up differently to where there's no risk of actually melting your figure or the plastic, but it does really soften it up to where you could limber them up and get a lot of range that you couldn't get before. Now, this is not unheard of in toy lines. I think NECA always says to heat them up. And then I think Valaverse actually sends you a little instruction paper, and it says, to heat up the figure before you start, trying to move it. It's just, the way it is now, the way with plastics, and of course these are made in China, you never know what you're going to get. So it's just a precautionary, thing to do before you actually move it around. You don't have to, but it actually does free up a lot of the range that the joints have. And I've actually come to find out that if you do this first, you could avoid a lot of things that could actually happen. But basically what I wanted to show was that when you first get this figure, he doesn't have that much range at the head. Like, he can look down, that's not a problem. But looking up is, because basically he'll just look straight ahead. You don't get that much range looking up. And basically what you do is you warm it up and you pop off the head, and you can expose the neck porthole here. Basically what you want to do is take your tool and cut out a little notch behind the neck, because you actually want them to look back. So that's the way you want the peg to, move a little bit more, because forward isn't an issue, it's just back. Now, you could actually do a little bit forward and a little bit back, which would give them more range. But I don't really like to do this, because you kind of risk that you'll make the ball in there really loose. So I usually either want to move it one direction and that's it. I don't really try to move multiple directions, because the more notches you put in, the looser that the ball in there will get loose. So you don't want to risk that. But you do notch it out with your Dremel. And then you do want to buy some little kind of sanding tools. You could get these at a lot of places. I mean, they're not too expensive, but they come with different, tips. But they are made for like sanding and taking off debris. So you take this and clean off any debris on the neck. Sometimes I leave a little bit in there because it's not, you're never gonna see it. But you do use these little hand tools to, sand stuff down and take off debris. But once you do that, you'll notice that, of course, he still looks down. That's not a problem. But now he does look up a little bit more than before because that neck peg actually slides into that little slot that you put into the peg hole. So, and then also warming it up helps for you to get a little bit more range. And it's still solid. It doesn't, flop around or anything like that, but you just get that added little bit of range to look up. Now the next thing is, of course, the forward crunch. Now, this is basically any McFarlane figure. I mean, recently they have been doing it a little bit better, but if you want to, you can actually do this to probably like 99% of the McFarlane figures. And that is, of course, you want to heat them up and pop off the lower body and then pop off the abdomen part from the upper chest. And then you'll have kind of the same system, which is like a ball peg. Now, you do the same thing, whatever direction you want him to, go more range with is where you make the notch. Now, this notch will have to be a little bit wider because the peg is thicker, but you just get in there with your Dremel and make your notch. Now, of course, before you do this, he has very little movement forward, if any at all. Basically, if you were to take this original release here, he has no forward crunch, to speak of. I mean, it has a little bit at the hips if you push him forward, but we kind of want it to be in the actual abdomen area. So you could put the notch on the top one, and then you can also notch up the lower part just to give it that double, little range, because it's not going to be much, but it is going to be enough to give you some more forward motion. So instead of going only to where he could before, he can actually go forward now, which allows you to get him in some, more running poses, has more range. Now, another thing that this does is kind of the same thing as that it loosens it up a little bit, which means that, he has range at first, not a big deal. But once you do these notches and put them back together, of course, warm them up before you snap the balls back in, he just has smoother movement because there's like less friction there. So now, even twisting them and putting them to the side and turning them in poses, it's just a lot smoother. Now, that's why I say you got to be careful, because if you take out too much by trying to notch it in too many places, you're going to get probably like where it'll be loose, where as soon as you move him, he's going to be like flopping around, which, nobody wants. So just use that one notch, because leaning back, he has no problem. It's the forward that we want to, increase. So now he can lean forward pretty well. Like I said, get him in running poses, has more smoother movement. So you can basically do this to all McFarlane figures that have this double ball at the abdomen and at the waist. So that's just something you could do. Now, this is like an advanced thing. If you don't want to take the time to do it and you just want McFarlane to make the figures like this, that's just an extra process that he's probably like trying to figure out, but they still want to fit it into that price range. But this will take your figure, to the next level to get poses that you probably couldn't get before. Now, this brings us into the last thing I wanted to talk about, and that is the thigh swivel. Now, when I was looking at that TV series Flash figure, I also pointed out how he does have the thigh cuts, which I'm not a big fan of, just because as soon as you turn it, it breaks up the sculpt and doesn't look very appealing to the eye. So McFarlane has tried to advance that by making this kind of ratchet system inside the hip. Now, when you first get a figure out of the box, it may be loose. I think I remember that Blue Beetle and Booster Gold were like really loose. Like as soon as I got them out, you could swivel the thigh really well. But there will be a lot of figures that just will not swivel. In fact, this one, if you could see when I first, started messing with them, you move the swivel and it barely has, a couple of millimeters of movement, and I think the right leg would hardly move at all. It was even less than the other one. So what you do is you can heat this up in water, which I would actually, prefer, but I did hit it with the heat gun just to like loosen it up. And what happens there is that it loosens up that ratchet socket that's in there in the hip, and now you could get a lot more range. And actually, the more you do this and the more you move it back and forth, it actually stays like that, and you free up the range that you didn't have before. Hot water works fantastic, but you can use the heat gun. But that actually allows you to swivel the boot without having to move the rest of the leg, and without a thigh cut. You could just move it at the hip, which is what you want. And even after a while, I gave it a little while, and I went back to moving it, and it still had that same freed up motion. You could do it again and then, really loosen it up. But that just goes to show you that you can get that leg movement without sacrificing the sculpt or adding that really ugly looking thigh cut. Now, one more thing before I go, and that is that people still talking about the trunks, which, are rubber. They're a softer rubber. And I don't know why people are scared to do this, but of course, you can kick his leg back, and it will bunch up the trunks, but it doesn't do anything to it at all. When you go back to its original form, as long as you don't leave it like that for a month, I would say, and even if you did leave it for an extended period of time, you could just put it in hot water and it'll go back to the same original form. Even hit it with the heat gun and it'll shrink back to the same. But basically, you don't have to do that as long as it's like too long of a period that you have them like that. You can even kick up and it, wrinkles up the trunks. But once you put it back down, it'll go back to its original form by itself. It doesn't stay like that. And that is actually why McFarlane uses these rubber trunks, so you could get that full range with the legs and always go back and have them go back to their original form. Pretty cool stuff. I mean, like I said before, collect the way you want to, but these are just some tips, in case you wanted to try and do these things. Now, heat can be used for many things. Like when you want to put weapons in some hands are kind of stiffer than others. You could, dip it in hot water or hit it with the heat gun, and the gun goes in right away. And then as soon as you let it go, it'll, go back to its original shape. And there's just less risk of damaging the figure, which is why I like having that heat gun right here on the ready, just in case I ever need it. But anyways, guys, that's just a quick little tip video. In the end, you can collect any way you want. That's, up to you. But you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.